It was always one of the most frustrating parts of living in my new apartment. Sure, the area was green and cheery, and sure, everything I could ever need was within a 15-minute walk, but that alley played on my mind far too often. I've always been something of a night owl and enjoy late nights out with friends or even alone, but the thought of walking through the very sparsely lit, far too lengthy alley that gave me the quickest way home was almost always enough for me to spend an extra 5 minutes on a detour around it. Sometimes I'd be in a bad or brave enough mood to give my phone flashlight a toggle and walk down it as fast as I could after peering over my shoulder to check for some unknown entity stalking me. I could never quite rationalize it, but on those rare occurrences, the urge to look back into the darkness behind me wasn't born out of vigilance, but of something far more primal. You know how you can feel somebody or something's presence behind you? Sometimes it'd be the feeling of a presence, and sometimes it'd be the feeling of eyes boring a hole into the back of my skull. I often couldn't resist the urge to turn around, but there would be times the sensation was so strong I'd take off sprinting into the night ahead of me. Enough about how things used to be, though. Over time, I grew used to sparing a few minutes more to get home after dark and didn't think too much of it once it became the norm. That was until a few weeks ago. I had my music on at a low level and was subtly grooving along to the beat in a slightly drunken state after a night catching up with some friends. Like always, my autopilot routine directed me away from the alley in the park that led to it, instead giving me the familiar comfort of a streetlight-lined residential road. The deep black sky was given an orange hue by the freshly installed lights, and it was so quiet I could hear my own footsteps over the music. Now, the way the detour worked was that it took me on a residential road around the park, and that allowed me to avoid cutting through the park through the alley. There were multiple ways around the alley. This was just the quickest of them. At the end of the detour, the two would intersect and I could look into the darkness from the other side, whilst silently thanking myself for staying out of it. I was about 60 seconds out from the intersection when I found myself walking down somewhere I shouldn't have been. The transition from that peaceful road to this cocoon of nothingness was so smooth that I'd taken a couple of steps before realizing where I was. By the point I came to my wits, I decided to get out of there as fast as I could, and so my flashlight accompanied me back to where I should have been. I tried to rationalize things once I got home, but deep down, I knew something about what happened wasn't right. Still though, I blamed it all on the alcohol, until it happened again, and again. It didn't matter which detour I took, nor did it matter how sober I was. If it was past dark and I was on my way home, the alley would show up, like clockwork, always at the same distance from my apartment as the original, always the same length and always as dark and cold as ever. I'd begrudgingly accepted this baffling quirk as part of my new autopilot routine and valued being able to arrive home after dark far more than I was afraid of walking through the old, supernaturally appearing alleyway. That was until he showed up. Between my 21st and 23rd birthdays, I had something of a stalker, Marty. It started off innocuous enough, and you might even be able to say we were friends at one point. Marty knew I had a partner, and at that point. So there were no overt romantic intentions, but his behavior grew further and further detached from reality, and I happened to be at the center of it all. I remember realizing I had quite the problem on my hands when he sent me the 13th of 15 bouquets within the same week, all with handwritten notes expressing love and admiration for his little Maya. Now I knew I could never be too vigilant, so I found the quickest way out, and before long he was blocked on any medium of communication we'd been using. And yet the bouquets kept coming, and coming, and coming. It took until the 137th bouquet for a restraining order to be granted, and that was only because his note for that particular little gift insinuated he'd hurt both himself and me if things don't improve between us, in quotes. By the point of my restraining order might have come in useful, I'd packed up and left my small town to move to where I currently live for work. Last I heard of Marty was that he'd taken a bunch of sleeping pills and tried to kill himself. I'm not quite sure whether he was eventually successful or not. Well, I wasn't until he showed up again, or at least some form of him did. I felt the familiar gaze of angry eyes into the back of my head and couldn't help but turn around, only to be startled half to death by the wiry outline of a man standing about 20 feet behind me. I couldn't make out much of his features, but the whites of his eyes shone amongst the blackness he was shrouded in, and they never broke contact with me. I felt them before I turned around, and I still felt them when I spun back the other way to sprint the rest of the way to perceived safety. Sleeping was difficult that night, and when it finally came, I was greeted with nightmares of the man's presence. Just like earlier that night, he stood there, waited, watched. As always, the alley made an appearance the next time I was out after dark a few days later. I tried to forget what was waiting for me in the last time as I approached the point of no return. Once again, there he was, a little closer this time, as still as the summer night we found ourselves in, and this time I could make out a few more of his features. It wasn't long before the pieces of long repressed memories fell into place. "Marty?" I called out, trying and failing to project a lack of fear in my trembling voice. His stone-like gaze remained as it ever was, anger and emotionlessness both somehow present in his beady eyes all at once. Before long I ran again, and before long he showed up in my restless sleep again. It was a long while before I could muster up the courage to come home after dark again, but eventually the night came. I expected his presence and braced myself for it. How much closer could he even be this time? A couple feet more? I would just force myself to avoid looking back and run as fast as I could to get out of there. Easy does it, right? I crossed the point of no return and was faced with the familiar weighted blanket of darkness ahead of me. And then I felt the cold touch of a bony hand on my shoulder. I knew what it'd be, who it'd be, and yet I desperately fought against my urge to turn around. I suppose all the nights I hadn't walked down the alley didn't stop him from moving, and the inches and feet gradually built up until he was within touching distance. Horrifying, evil-spirited touching distance. It was as if the fingers running along my neck had paralyzed me, kept me prisoner to the whims of what was behind me. When I was finally allowed to turn around, I saw Marty's pale, almost lifeless face inches from mine, his already accentuated cheekbones jagged through his flesh, and his wiry frame was somehow even thinner than it had been. Instinct led to me begging for mercy, for my life, and yet he stood there with his eyes still, piercing mine, as if he were gazing into my very soul itself before placing one of his bony fingers against his lips as if to quiet me down. He produced an orange bottle of pills I still don't know the name of and motioned for me to open up, much to my ultimately fruitless protest and disobedience. Pill after pill after pill piled up on my dry tongue until my mouth was practically full. Then came the water and the flushing of the vast majority of those pills down my throat and into my system. The sheer volume burned my insides and my throat screamed out for help, or at least for more water. As if in tune with my body itself, he obliged, and a steady stream of water trickled into my mouth. The next memory is waking up in a sanitized, white-walled blandness of a hospital room, a catheter attached to my right arm and my head spinning in a flurry of pain. The doctors told me I was found unconscious lying just outside of the alley by a late-night cyclist. They told me that I tried to kill myself, but I know better. It's been a few months since my ordeal, and the long recovery time meant that even when home, I didn't have much use for being out so late. Besides, I was far too afraid of that fucking alley anyway. Last night, I lost track of time whilst out at a bar. A friend of mine told me something had been slipped into my drink whilst I was looking away, and given the fact we drunk a little too much anyway, offered to ride the subway home with me. I was so out of it that I'd forgotten about my little conundrum. Before I could even realize what had happened, my friend called out to me confused. Hey Mia, where are we? I focused my blurry vision, and there he was. What's up, y'all? It's your favorite ginger, the Soulless. In this episode, just real quick, I want to take a few minutes of your time to show you the progress on the Horror Stories channel and how all of you that have subscribed to me and that watch my videos consistently have seriously helped me out. This is just the last 28 days. Look at that watch time right there. 121.2 hours. That's crazy. The amount of views that the channel has gotten, even if it's not getting that many subs. That's still a huge number. The goal to be able to do superfan stuff is 500 subscribers, and the goal to be able to actually get paid for my videos is much more than that. It takes 1,000 subs, and I have to have 4,000 public watch hours. The gaming channel sitting at 153 views, 39.7 hours of watch time, which is pretty good considering I've been putting most of my effort into this channel lately. That's not a whole lot compared to my other channel, but thank you all for watching. Share the video with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your loved ones. Thank you so much for watching.